Hey, this is Chelsea Ward, your functional wellness practitioner and health coach, here to talk to you today about how you know if you should be removing inflammatory foods like grains, dairy, sugar, and artificial sweeteners, soy, and even alcohol from your diet. The foods I just listed are some of the most inflammatory foods you can put in your body. And this list is not all inclusive, but it's a good start. So how do you know if you should actually be removing these foods? Well, the answer is very simple. You could run a range of food sensitivity panels, or you could just remove a range of foods for a period of time to see how your body responds, which is known as an elimination diet. The diet includes eliminating a food group of inflammatory foods for at least 30 days, starting with the ones I mentioned above is a good start, but if there are additional foods you feel like your body doesn't really respond well to, then you can go ahead and remove those during this time as well. Now, do elimination diets really work? Well, the truth is there is a little controversy here. So the foods that are recommended for removal on an elimination diet are typically those that people have a reaction to. But as we know, everyone's body is not the same. So the best way to learn which foods your body is actually running a reaction to is to run a food sensitivity panel. And this really is going to give you a clearer picture of what's going on and which foods are causing inflammation in your body specifically. As the saying goes, one man's meat is another man's poison. So take a healthy fish like salmon, for example. It is a healthy fish, right? But what if you've developed a food sensitivity? If that's the case, then healthy salmon could actually be causing an inflammatory response in the body every time you consume it, which leads to stress, and it can have all sorts of ill effects long term. The great thing about a food sensitivity test is that you can usually remove those certain foods, heal the gut, and then you can reintroduce those later on down the road. So let's talk about the common mistakes that people actually make when they are eliminating these inflammatory foods. I'll use gluten as an example, but this is actually true for all inflammatory foods. Common mistake number one, removing one and not all inflammatory foods. If your body is having an inflammatory response to something that you're consuming, and you don't really work to remove all the things that could be causing inflammation, then it may be difficult to recognize a positive or negative response from removing a certain food. For example, if you remove gluten, but you fail to remove dairy, then you could still continue to have those symptoms in your body related to gluten exposure. One of the reasons is because gluten and dairy have very similar molecular makeups. When the body is attacking one, it will likely attack the other. Common mistake number two, reducing inflammatory foods instead of eliminating inflammatory foods. The problem with reduction over removal is that you never really give your body the proper chance to respond in a positive way. So if you're only reducing these foods, the truth is gluten and its impact on the body can actually be evident for about 6 months. And one little bite is as bad as eating the whole loaf. So if you're going to make an effort to do the test, then go ahead and do it, all or nothing. Common mistake number three is that you don't give your body enough time to respond. I hear people say all the time, I tried the gluten-free diet and it just didn't work for me. But we can actually have delayed reactions to food when it comes to a sensitivity in the body. So we tend to think of these things more like we do a food allergy sometimes, but the two are quite different. Your body can react to a food or other substance for up to 3 weeks after you consume it. So before you call it quits, make sure you're giving your body enough time. Commit and stick with it. Common mistake number four, you aren't satisfied without dairy or gluten. I get it. I love those foods too. But much of our dissatisfaction after a meal when eliminating inflammatory foods come down to two things. And that is not eating enough protein, fats, or carbs or nutrients to actually fill our bellies, and food cravings, which can actually express themselves in the form of hunger. The way that you can avoid this is to make sure that you're eating enough and to balance your plate with plenty of healthy meat, cooked vegetables, and even starchy vegetables until your body begins to adjust. So if you truly are hungry, then eat more whole foods and play around with those ratios of carbs, fats, and proteins to find your unique ratio. And this sometimes depends a lot on how fast you metabolize certain foods. So if you find that you're super hungry or tired or moody within an hour or two after consuming a plate full of vegetables, then try adding more dense proteins to see if that helps. Play around until you find the ratio that actually works for you. Common mistake number 5 when eliminating foods is filling up on gluten-free processed alternatives. If you've read my book, Healed His Way, then you know that I discuss this in detail. Foods are actually labeled gluten-free are not always gluten-free. And when you're attempting to avoid them, then you want to focus on whole foods instead of the gluten-free snacks. So this is not really to say that you can't snack on foods from a bag here and there, but if you do, you should look for grain-free and not gluten-free. Why? Because gluten is not technically gluten-free. Truth bomb for you here is that gluten, according to the FDA's definition, only includes one type, and that's gliadin. So gluten-free foods do not take into consideration the other types because the FDA regulation doesn't require them to. So if you're consuming bread labeled gluten-free, is it really? Well, likely not. The best way to avoid gluten is to avoid grains altogether. And last but not least, common mistake number 6 is starting a countdown timer to the end of your elimination diet and just going back to your old habits when it's done. Consider paying attention to your body when you eliminate certain foods. Take an inventory. How do you feel? What's your mood like? Do you have more energy, less energy? And if you're seeing a positive change, why would you jump back into the same old habits that were giving you negative results? If you choose to bring those toxic inflammatory foods back into your body, the best way to do that is to go very slow. Introduce those foods one at a time, pay attention to your body, and give the food a couple of weeks. If there are negative effects, then consider removing it for good. And if your body isn't responding well to a certain food, then it is causing inflammation. And with inflammation comes disease. The best way to find out how our body is responding to a particular food or food group is to test for specific food sensitivities by running appropriate lab tests that show us the foods that we're actually reacting to. And when you do this, I highly recommend removing all the foods that we've discussed as part of the inflammatory food list while removing anything that shows up on this food panel as well. These tests are not all created equal, so make sure you're working with a knowledgeable health professional to understand which tests are right for you. So what's next? While cleaning up inflammatory foods, you may want to work on your gut health. Some of my favorite products to do things like that are collagen protein, immunoglobulins, and the loved Ganoderma mushroom spores. Again, work with your practitioner before implementing any of these supplements or others because you are uniquely created. In the event that you're looking for your own practitioner, then I would love to hear more about your unique story and help guide you and work with you to resolve those issues. You can access my services on my website at chelseaward.com. And if you'd like to chat after reviewing them, simply fill out the form on my site for a complimentary discovery call to schedule your appointment. I'm here to see you succeed in reaching all of your health and wellness goals. Until next time, be happy, healthy, and whole.